Hello, folks. Hi, JP and Marco. Welcome to this new meetup with Avanscoperta. I'm here today with JP Bayley and Marco, our two TBR experts, to have a conversation about training from the back of the room, as you can see on the title. How are you, folks? Welcome, first of all.
I'm good, thanks.
Thanks,
Awesome.
really good.
Fantastic. So in case you are here by mistake or don't know what we're talking about, this is a meetup about TBR, training from the back of the room, teaching method from Sharon Bowman. Hi, Sharon. That we're going to talk about today. So before we dig into the topic, I'd like to remind you that you can write, and actually you are very encouraged to write questions on the YouTube and LinkedIn chats that you find down here. We're going to make this interactive, of course, not only because it's TBR, but because that's how we do all of our online meetups. So write us questions, your curiosities, if you've already tried this methodology or not, or if you're curious about it, and we are gonna address all your questions. Quick introduction. Let's start with JP.
Thanks, Enrico. So my name's Jean-Paul. Everybody calls me JP, so JP Bayley, and I live in Southwest England. I've been a TBR trainer since 2015, and I'm one of the two TBR trainer certification course certifiers. I love TBR because it gives us many ideas, activities, and techniques that we can use, which work with how humans learn best, and it keeps people engaged and helps them learn in a way that helps new content stick.
Well, there's already a lot, and I can't wait for this to be discussed by the three of us and all of you from home. Marco, so your turn.
Yeah, what to say? I'm Marco. I come from Italy. I live in Padua, so very, very near to Venice. And I discovered the TBR in 2017 as an attendee of a training organized by Avanscoperta. But since the first day, I tried to apply what I learned, and I discovered that I loved the way that TBR is organized and the mindset under TBR. So I decided to meet JP, that was my trainer, and I decided to improve my knowledge of TBR and to become a certified trainer. So that's why I'm here today. But in particular, I'm really, really happy to have JP with us, because I consider him the guy that helped me improving my knowledge on TBR. And so I'm very, very happy to have him here, and I think he will be really precious for us with his experience. So I'm really curious about listening to him and asking him several questions I have also from my students. So that's why I'm here, both like a student and a trainer. So very, very happy for that.
Thanks, Marco.
Awesome, and you can see the enthusiasm of Marco is something that we at Avanscoperta also share, because TBR really was a revolution in the way we design our training courses and learning experiences. And one of the main points of it is that it's, we don't need to think about learning as something boring or people sitting in front of someone talking for the whole time for hours or in front of slides, but it's actually fun. It's good fun. And if you've been following us on social media, you've seen that 1 or 2 weeks ago, we did actually our TBR workshop in Milan with Marco. It was 2 days. And well, it was indeed a lot of fun. We can wait to the next one in October, and that's why. But in the meantime, we wanted to expand a bit more on this. We already did a few meetups with Marco, and also we had a chat with Terry Fritz, who was the first person we did the TBR with. Hi, Terry. But this time we wanted to include JP as well, because as you heard, is the go-to person when it comes to become a certified TBR trainer in Europe. So who better than the two gentlemen we have here today, right? But first things first, we've heard a bit about what TBR is about, so training from the back of the room. But of course, as usual, when we do our events, we like to make things clear and easy for everyone. So whereas you heard about it already or not, well, a short introduction is coming. So JP, would you tell us something more about TBR and, well, why is it useful and why it matters?
Yeah, of course. So we often experience training where it's just like somebody with extreme knowledge at the front of a room just doing a massive brain dump of all of their knowledge to us. And it's a very passive way of taking in knowledge. We're having knowledge kind of given to us. We're not interacting with that knowledge much beyond our own note taking. And it turns out that actually that's not a particularly great way of learning. And when you do learn that way, it's usually down to your own skills as a learner rather than the skills of the person who's introducing the knowledge to you in many ways. What we then sometimes see is that actually people have you'll have trainers and teachers who might introduce a few activities into things, but they're still very, very trainer led, the whole journey that you're going through as a learner. Bit more interactive, bit more interesting, but it doesn't entirely play to what we know about how humans learn best. So TBR takes it onto another level. We have a framework for designing training, and then we have some principles that we can apply, and then a lot of tools and activities, techniques that we can use. And all this thing kind of packaged together is what we call training from the back of the room. And it's about getting the trainer out the way of the learning. The trainer becomes more of a facilitator of the learning process. All the hard work the trainer does is before the training day begins. And then during the class, it's how much of this stuff can we turn over to the learners so that they can be fully engaged and make that a deep learning experience where things stick. So that's my best attempt at a short summary of quite a complex subject. I hope it covers it.
I think it's an excellent start. And one of the points you already mentioned, and we're going to dig a bit about it later on as well, is that the focus is on learning for adults. So it's very different concept as opposed to, what I would say we're forced to experience at school when we were kids, all of us, because none of it was, available or maybe even discovered, let's put it this way. Marco, would you have anything you'd like to add to this?
I just would like to add that we usually, talking about TBR, we use a word like training or teaching or classes. But in fact, TBR is about creating a way for people to share information and to stay together and to have the feeling that what they know is really important. So what I love about TBR is that it is a good way to allow people or to help people staying together and sharing information and knowledge. So it's just not something that you can apply to a class in the usual way. So it's not something that you would apply just to school or if you have to organize a training, but it is something that you can also apply on people that together have to discuss, have to share, and have the need to stay together, having the feeling that they are co-creating something. So it is a very good way of creating a class meaning that you create a group of people that enjoy staying together like a school classroom, but they enjoy to stay together and to share and to discuss and to discover together. So that's why I really enjoy to train TBR also to people that are not just a trainer in the usual way of considering the role of a trainer. So people that stay together and work together with other people. So this is my feeling about TBR that I have every time I do my classes.
And as mentioned, we've seen it last week, definitely, and it was really interesting. Anything to share about this recent experience? I know also JP has been doing a training last week, so we have two very fresh experiences, and every class is different, right? We'll dig a bit more in a second about who who are the people coming to these classes as well.
Yeah, well, that's the thing I get to see running, and Marco will obviously see this too from running the class many times, is no class is the same, because the people are always different. They've all got different experiences and different things that they love to share. And yeah, it's an enjoyable experience to train it, and it's a very enjoyable experience to experience it as well, to be one of the learners within it. And as Marco mentioned, you know, it's a great set of tools for subject matter experts just to be able to share their knowledge. It doesn't have to be for somebody who would formally describe themselves as a trainer or a teacher. We all have to teach and train at certain points in our lives, be it mentoring others or onboarding people or whatever it happens to be. It helps a lot that if we've got a framework of how to do this in an engaging way, rather than just going through, you know, maybe modeling patterns that we saw when we were in school, which is, you know, listen to hear me speak, listen to hear me talk, which is what many of us went through when we were in school.
What I would add, thinking about my last class, is that I had the chance to teach or to talk about, to train TBR in Italian, and I really enjoyed that, because training in Italian allows me and also all the participants to use powerful words, or to have the chance to talk about our feelings and staying together in a more Italian way. And I really enjoyed that. So I also like to teach TBR in English, but in particular, the last time I had the chance to teach it and to discuss about it in Italian, and translating things that are in English to an Italian way is also a way for us to consider how we can embody this kind of theory, and it becomes part of our life. So I really enjoyed to have the chance to train in Italian. So I'm happy of that. This is something that is still sticky on my body and on my brain. The feeling of staying together, talking in Italian about something that is really important for me and really powerful. So this is the best part we had, staying together. Yeah.
And talking a bit more about what kind of people you had in the class, we briefly mentioned, of course, TBR, and the heading says it's not really for people who define themselves as teacher, trainers, and coaches.
Yeah.
So what could we add on this? Because I know sometimes the title can be a bit misleading somehow, and you might think, okay, this is not for me, but actually it is for anyone. Let's repeat it, because I think it's very important. It's for anyone who at some point in their, well, career or life has to share something to others and make sure these others will understand and, you know, learn something really, rather than, as I said, having million slides or the like. So how is this useful? That's a question for the two of you, of course, for anyone who is not strictly a trainer.
If I think through all of the people who I have trained, yes, there are several people who would consider themselves as professional trainers in there, but I've also had people who internally might be, well, I know are software engineers within an internal organization, and all their job is to spread good practices and good ideas around the rest of the organization. So that's one example where they weren't people who would classify themselves specifically as trainers, but they needed to impart their knowledge somehow. You know, we do get people who are from the Agile community in there, for sure. So people who would classify themselves as coaches or Scrum Masters and so on. But some of the more interesting cases that I see is where people are really experiencing this for the first time. It's they're saying, well, you know, actually, I want to improve my training skills, but I'm not a trainer. The joy that it brings them suddenly to be able to kind of do these things from these other job roles, which don't have trainer, coach, or teacher in their title, is quite something. Yeah, so, you know, folk who maybe work in people and culture, in HR, you know, people who maybe you're working in management who've got to bring people on, bring people into companies. You know, I've had people who are actually work in marketing functions in companies as well. The stuff that they can use for spreading their knowledge within their organizations too. So it is a very, very versatile tool, and actually one of the great things about it is its relative simplicity. You know, if you follow these steps, you're going to be in a good place if you're trying to introduce some new knowledge to someone.
I would like to start from something that JP told, that it is TBR can be useful for people that have to organize learning sessions, that have to organize trainings. So not just on the idea that they should be teachers, but as an example, think about HR people that must organize or build up a sort of training session, or thinks about that in their company. Or think about managers that needs that informations and also knowledge flows into their company. So usually what this kind of people do is just having, or what usually happens is that these people have the feeling that they should just buy something that is a sort of training. So I'm not telling that to you, Avanscoperta. I know that this is something that you do, but the most important part, I'm sure that Enrico, you are with me, is not just on selling and buying the trainings, but it's about co-creating them. So finding a way to create something that is valuable, that has value, that is able to have an impact on people. So having this kind of knowledge and knowing how to organize them, knowing what to search in a trainer, or knowing how people like to learn, or must enjoy learning that they are having. People that need to organize this kind of trainings must or can understand how to do it better, how to find their people that can help them, how to co-create, how to ask the trainer or the teacher that is coming into the company on how to talk about something or to help people learning more. So I think that this kind of training can address not just people that have to be in front of people, but as the name says, people that also can train from the back. And from the back, you have the trainer that is able to stay from the back. But you have also several people that are into the organization, and from the back, try to help people understanding, knowing, sharing knowledge. So everybody that usually is on the back of a training can enjoy this kind of a training session. So this is my feeling. Yeah.
And from the chat we had last week with JP and Marco, I took a note of a sentence which is still resonating a lot in my head, which is the learning outcome is the filter to knowing what the content has to be. Now, as Marco just mentioned, we're not only talking about the person or the people who are entitled or not to be technically at the front, which we in training from the back of the room refer to them as the facilitators, and they are at the back. But also to, whoever is in charge of maybe creating a learning path or co-creating the learning itself. So what we, when talking about TBR, want to stress is that the learning outcome has to be the filter to what the content has to be. So it's not a matter of filling 2, 3, 4 hours worth of content, slide, whatever, but pointing at I don't know, that don't have to be 1 million, but to what the actual outcomes have to be. So what am I gonna be able to do from day one after the training is finished? So those are the things we want to pay attention to, and we refer to them as learning outcome. So flipping the classroom, but is one concept, but also flipping the whole idea of how we learn and have to teach stuff is very important, I think, because sometimes we try, well, not we, but in general, it can be a tendency to just consider a training as something that has to be delivered no matter what, no matter who you have in front of you. and what the learning outcome is. It becomes just a checklist of boxes to tick, regardless of that. But in training from the back of the room, the actual focus is on the learning outcome. Now let's dig a bit more into this, because I think it's interesting. So how does TBR make this into practice? Of course, I'm referring to the 4C, for example. So let's give an overview of what's the deal here. So how does it happen?
We have a strong bias, I guess, towards putting the learner in the center of things. And so we have this formula that we use for generating learning outcomes, which is observable and completely learner focused. And when we were talking about this as a filter, really, we all as trainers and speakers have things that we like to do, things we like to say, activities that we like to use. And sometimes we do that without thinking about the learning outcome. So if we bring the learning outcome in, at the end of this particular learning segment, learners will be able to do this visible thing. And the activity we want to introduce does not work with that idea, then we shouldn't be using it, right? That's kind of like at its simplest thing. So we start with the end in mind by figuring out what journey the learner will have gone on by the time they've left this learning experience, whatever it is. And then we use that as a driver for designing our 4C, what we call a 4Cs map. So based upon accelerated learning ideas from like the 1970s and 80s, and it's a simplified version of this, we have the idea that when we warm people up to their learning environment, to the learners around them, and also to the content, this is what we call connections activities, they're more prepared to be able to learn. Their brains get warmed up, they feel comfortable in the environment. Then we start introducing what we call concepts. This is new content. And then after we've introduced some new content to them, we get them to do what we call concrete practice. So they do something with that knowledge, and typically that concrete practice is the thing that we're looking for in the learning outcome. So if we've said to somebody, look, at the end of this, you'll be able to describe X, we'll be getting learners to describe X and watch them doing that. And then finally, the last of the C's is conclusions, which is all about planning, evaluating what I've learned, and celebration. And when I say evaluating what I learn, it's about the learner reflecting on their learning journey and figuring out what they now know, what they'd like to know more about compared to when they walked into the room, rather than, now they have to go off and do an assessment and we're going to decide whether they passed or failed. It's evaluation as in kind of, some reflection time for the learners. So very, very briefly, that's a description of what the 4Cs are. And the two things are linked. We have our topic and learning outcome, audience, and the time that we have to deliver whatever the content is. And we break it down into this 4Cs. We refer to it as a map because it kind of maps out a journey of where we would like to take our learners in whatever experience we're building for them.
And I would like to ask you something, if I can, JP, because since I have the chance to have you here, I have several questions that I wanted to ask you, not just by me, but also by TBR participants, because as you know, usually TBR is driven by questions. So we have walls with a lot of questions posed by participants. And one that I usually have is it possible to use TBR? So to use this kind of approach, also if we have to teach something that is not that is really, really technical. So I am thinking about people working in a very, very hard industries, or people that have to, I don't know, configure machinery, or people that have to do something, have to deliver a training that have compulsory parts on it. So is TBR just made for teaching with fun, or is it also possible to use TBR for sharing and talking about things that are very, very just let me use the term, that are really serious, that are maybe not fun, something also that could be sad to say, something that could be difficult to say. So is TBR the right approach for this kind of things or not, in your opinion? Because I have an opinion that it could be, but yeah, I want to ask it to you because you are more experienced than me.
So there are an awful lot of tools and techniques that you can use in TBR when you're designing things, and some of them would be appropriate for some of those cases that you've mentioned, and some of them wouldn't be. But fundamentally, training from the back of the room is more than just the activities that are in there. The activities are great, but for me, I'd be taking it back to, is the learning outcome something that I would be able to observe at the end of it, and can I then use a 4Cs map for that? And I'm yet to find a case where I am delivering some form of training or designing some form of training where that is not, where that's untrue. So, like taking your example, if you had to teach somebody about using a piece of machinery, well, you might start off by asking them what they know about how to operate that piece of machinery. You might then introduce them to some basic parts of that, and then set up some sort of simple practicing exercise for using that machinery, with them being overseen, or maybe they're actually teaching each other how to use the particular piece of machinery, and then at the end they would have some sort of conclusion activity about what they decide they need to go and do next, how they plan to use that information. So just because it's a technical thing which might not be fun as we would see it, I'm sure there are people who find messing around with industrial machinery a whole lot of fun, but we're not going to be running around a factory kind of causing ourselves health and safety problems. We would choose appropriate techniques which would still be able to take us through a 4Cs map. And likewise with something like compliance training, and that's the other one that we often get asked about. If we have a learning outcome which is deeper than you've just been told this, right? And there are times where maybe people just need to be told it and they don't really need to interact with it. Then again, providing you choose appropriate tools and techniques, if you can build a 4Cs map for it and you've got learning outcomes for it, then in my opinion, why wouldn't you use training from the back of the room? It doesn't have to be fun activity, people running around singing, dancing, or anything like that. Not that we do that anyway in TBR, but I'm just kind of using it as a particularly extreme example of things. You can tone it down and keep it appropriate for the seriousness of the topic that you're dealing with.
Thank you for that, because I agree with you, and I like the idea that came in my mind, that it is TBR is a toolbox with a lot of tools inside, but it's not just the tools. So you can use them to create whatever you want. And like on a toolbox, there is something that is appropriated and something that is not, something that you can use and something that you shouldn't. It depends on what you have to build, or depends on the wall you are in front. Some tools are the right and something is not. So I like this kind of idea, but the more tool you have and the more you know about your tools, the more you can decide which one is the right one. So it is better to have a toolbox with a lot of things inside, to have the chance to choose the right one, instead of just having one and thinking that you should do everything with just one tool. So I like this kind of idea. And talking about tools and talking about walls, I have another question that usually people ask to me, that is how to do something like TBR. That means, I don't know, just putting a lot of things on the wall. That means drawing, using colors, using Scotch tape, using a lot of things. How to do that if the room where you have to share information, where you have to teach, where you have to do a training, it seems to be built against, not just against TBR, but against people learning. I'm thinking about some university classrooms where it is quite impossible for people to move. Or I'm thinking about some very important room of companies where you can't put things on the wall because they are afraid that you can just dirty the wall, or where you can't use colors because they don't want. So my question for you is how to deal with this kind of places, real spaces that seems built against TBR, or if you want more in general, against people that have to learn together. What is your opinion on, or what is your trick for this kind of situations?
So, I mean, there's two things. One, I don't have, I try to avoid being put into that situation myself. It doesn't always work, in which case you've got to work with what you have. And when you have to work with what you have, then there are things that you can do that still are TBR. So, you know, remembering the 4 C's maps, I haven't actually mentioned the 6 brain science principles, the 6 trumps as well, which is something we shouldn't forget. Basically, you know, you can still design a class using the 4 C's in any of those environments, but again, you're having to choose tools that your constraints allow you to use. So, for example, in a lecture theatre, instead of, which lends itself very well to somebody standing at the front going blah 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 for hours, right? That's kind of what it's sort of built for. Breaking pieces of content down into 10-minute chunks and getting the learners to do an activity in between. And when I say an activity, I don't mean that they're doing star jumps while screaming out the most important thing to them, although that might be quite good fun. I was thinking more, you know, maybe you would provide them with some graphic organizers where they then capture their thoughts and their ideas. Maybe they might share with a person sitting next to them, or maybe you might get them to feed back to you some of the most important ideas you've just been discussing. So you do like what we call a shout out. So there's lots of things that you could inject into that sort of environment that would make it very interactive and still get people doing things. And then maybe when you do your concrete practice phase, there might be something where they do small presentations back, or they play a card game or something. You could distribute card games which people in pairs could play sitting next to each other in a lecture theatre. It's not ideal, but I don't see it as you cannot do anything in this environment that still works well for learning. If you're in a more corporate environment where you're not allowed to put posters up on the wall and so on, well, you still have flexibility with how people sit around in the room. So oftentimes it really is just, okay, right, well, we're not going to be able to do things like a gallery walk very easily because we're not allowed to stick things on the wall, but you can still have things on the table like, you know, instructions that drive conversations. You can be creative by bringing in, you know, for example, flip charts where people can actually capture just on the flip chart. It's not being stuck on the wall. Again, graphic organizers, another really great thing. There are tools which work outside of what I might refer to as the perfect environment, if such a thing exists.
So that's, as we said before, you don't need to use the full TBR package, because on one hand, you might not need it, and on the other hand, you might not be allowed to, put it simply.
Yeah. But as an example, I'm thinking about this session that, if you want, will be recorded. We can't see the faces of people that are connected with us. So in a sort of way, this can be a sort of place that could be against TBR. But I'm thinking about that we could just ask people, as an example, to stretch a little bit, just listening to us, and why not? So if we can stretch a little bit, and also if you are just looking at us in the recorded version, maybe today will be the only stretching you will have during your day, but why not doing that? So you can also do very, very little things, or you can tell to the people to do things, or you can just do things without telling it to people. So as an example, if I just start stretching myself, people will copy what I'm doing and will have the feeling that they can. So this is what TBR is telling to us. You don't have every time to tell to the people what you are doing, but it is something that is you do in the way you stay with people and you talk with them, and in that way you can find your own way of using your tools. So yeah, this is something that can be interesting also for people that are connected with us. This is a kind of room that is against TBR, but if we want, we can try to find ways to be to allow people and to help people learning and staying together and connecting with us and asking us questions. So if you have questions, please use the chat, because it is something that you can use to interact with us, and we will love to have this kind of interaction with you. So please feel free to use it if you want. I did your work, maybe, Enrico. Sorry. Yeah.
It's part of the game. Absolutely. Thanks, Marco. And since we were referring to this kind of setup not being exactly TBR friendly, a question I have, and of course we got asked like every day or so during the past 4 years, is, so what happens in a world where we are, well, when we were forced to work from home, but now the remote thing is kind of here to stay, I would guess, or anyway, TBR was designed to be in person, and then we know there is TBR. It's not exactly the same thing, but I know JP will correct me now and say the right things. But indeed, there is the possibility, on one hand, to learn TBR remotely and also to do TBR remotely. So what's the deal here?
So the virtual, when we designed the virtual version of training for the back of the room, we had to go right back to basics with it. So we knew we had the 4 C's, and that works okay. And we also knew that we had the 6 trumps, the brain science principles, and we could use those. And what else was there about learning virtually that we needed to bring in? And it turns out that actually, and I'm sure many of us have had this experience, if you spend all day online staring at a camera, it gets very tiring for the eyes. You get very stressed after doing it over a very long period of time. You know, it's not a good thing for us to be doing all the time. So we broke the class down into five modules of around, well, they are 2.5 hours each. They can be shorter, but they're usually 2.5 hours each, and built breaks into them. So it's like short pieces of instruction and interaction. We took a lot of the new content that people were having to learn and took that offline. So people were learning it in a self-paced manner. And then we were only bringing people together when it was necessary to do so. So as far as like the virtual end of things, moving things remote, the one thing you can't do is take what you've been doing in person and start using it remotely. That's not the best way of doing it. You have to start thinking again, how can I achieve the learning outcome I want? Do I have content that helps me do that? But I can't use the same activities that were there before. And I certainly can't have people together for 8 hours per day, day after day, doing this kind of thing in the way that we might do with a 2-day, 3-day, 4-day training program that we would do in person. We have to be mindful as well that the social interactions that are possible are different virtually, and we have to spend a lot more time kind of engineering those sorts of things. You know, one of the joys of in-person training for me is overhearing people when they're having a coffee break, you know, and they're kind of getting their coffee and their pastry, and they're talking about something, and that they're sharing an experience based upon something they've just learned. Engineering those learning moments in virtual is really, really difficult. Some might say even with the current technology we have, actually not possible. Hopefully one day we'll get there. So you've got to rethink the way that the whole thing works. and design to the strengths rather than try to force what we've been doing in person into a virtual environment and hope it works. And that's very much what TBR, the virtual edition, how we built it, and that's what we're aiming to get across and teach people about, that you know, there are other ways of doing things. You know, we can take advantage of the fact people are not having to pay for hotels and travel and, you know, take large times out of work. They can just dip in and out, but we can, you know, help them with spacing that out, taking control of their learning journey a lot more in between times, and you know, in doing that, hopefully the learning sticks, and we make advantage of the fact that they're just dropping by for 2.5 hours, you know, every few days, to learn with us.
I think the key point that you mentioned here is not you take what you had in person and just copy paste it into remote, but rethink about the whole thing. And indeed, the learning outcome is always our kind of compass here, to make sure we are doing the right thing. And the other thing definitely is not, well, that's one thing we all learned, the good way or the hard way, not having 8 hours straight of learning, of training whatsoever. You cannot replicate that either. And indeed, not even 4 hours sometimes, because as you mentioned, the TBR virtual edition is 2.5 hours. Is that correct?
Yeah. So each one's 2.5 hours. And the other thing was not overloading people with tools. Many people who attend TBR classes come from a technical background. We wanted to make sure that in doing the virtual edition, we were reminding people that actually they are very competent at these sorts of environments, at using these sorts of environments. However, what if they were training somebody who wasn't? What would they need what would they need in place to be able to onboard someone who had never interacted with an online whiteboard, was not particularly capable, or did not have lots and lots of experience of using things like Zoom, of using multiple windows and an operating system and moving from one to another. These are all things that many technical folk take for granted. And I have trained, actually very early in the lockdowns. I worked with some people who are absolutely at the top of their profession, but were really struggling with some of the environments we were setting them, because we'd made an assumption that wasn't true. You know, these are very well educated, extremely smart, extremely capable people who we just assumed would get this stuff, and actually it wasn't their area of expertise.
Super interesting. So much variety here, and again, not having people in the class, definitely a challenge. So we have the last 5-10 minutes of conversation. So for whoever is there, and I know you are, because StreamYard is telling me who is connected. Well, not your names, of course, but I know people are watching. So thanks for being with us so far. If you want to ask some more questions, this is the chance.
I would like just to add my 2 cents on the question you did before, Enrico. That is, what was the most difficult part of jumping into online sessions or starting to train online? And my biggest challenge was about the end of the training, the end of the session. So when you just press the exit button on Zoom or whatever you're using, and you just come back to your little room in your house, and if you haven't been able to create the classroom, to create the feeling of staying together, to create what in TBR we call the connection, that takes us a lot of time. Every time I do a TBR training, people tell me, oh, connection takes time. Yes, we need time. It's not just an icebreaker. It's not the meaning of breaking the ice. The meaning is connecting people together and creating the feeling of having the classroom. The first online session I had without taking into consideration how important is having a class with us have been very, very difficult, because it was something just like, I don't know, just like a performance. just like staying online for a couple of hours without having the feeling of creating something together. And what I love in TBR is that TBR puts a lot of effort and time, and there's a lot of art on trying to allow people to stay together, to have the feeling that as humans, we love to share what we know. We love to share what we are thinking about the world, and we love to share our questions. So staying together for a training is not just finding responses. The point is not learning more, but the point is sharing what we think about the world, and also sharing questions, sharing what we don't know, not just adding things to know, but it is also adding the idea that there are things that we don't know, but we are curious, we are interested on that. So this is something that the TBR can help to remember, and also to design when you are just building, you are designing, where you are thinking about a training. So if I have to summarize what the TBR is, in my point of view, but it's just mine, I don't know if for JP is the same. For my point of view, is TBR is a wonderful way to create a sense of staying together as a classroom, of staying together as people connecting and enjoying to share what they know and also what they don't know. But it's something that is created by people just because they love to interact and stay together. This is the most important part for me. Maybe I'm too romantic, I don't know, but this is the way that I love to think about TBR. I don't know if for JP is the same. So if you have to summarize TBR in just a couple of words, what is in your experience of having trainings and classes the most wonderful thing that happens every time you do a TBR? I don't know.
So I completely understand where your viewpoint is coming from, Marco. I wouldn't say it's overly romantic. For me, that's a wonderful byproduct of actually creating the learning community that we need to create to help people learn. And I love that. And in fact, I have classes which, years after the fat people are still sharing their what they've done, and arranging to meet up with each other when they're in each other's cities and things like that. And every so often I get like a message just of a photo of some people who've they've caught up for the first time in 2 years or something, and it's wonderful. If I had to sum it up in one sentence, it's learner-led learning, basically. Lots of L's. But for learner-led learning to be true, you need that community that you've described, Marco. And that is why the connections take so long. You can't just go into a space and go, okay, people, go ahead and learn. I'm just going to sit here and every so often I'll get an activity for you. It doesn't work. You need to have people who feel safe with each other, are supporting each other, and that you need to have that environment where people feel it's okay to give this a try.
Awesome. It's a very nice closing from both of you.
Yeah. I had a lot of more questions, but my suggestion also for people that are watching us and listening to us is just to follow your profile, JP. So to follow you on LinkedIn and so on, because you are sharing with us a lot of your discoveries and things you are just thinking about. So what I suggest to people is just to connect with you and to interact with you as I usually do. On LinkedIn, because it works, and we can learn more about TBR just following what you are writing and what are your ideas. So this is my suggestion for everybody that is watching us. I don't know if Enrico, you have something that you're curious about and that we could add to this discussion, or if there are no if there are no questions, I don't know if people.
Not as of now, but I'd like to thank Menaxi and Kansu for sharing their insights. I'd love to, well, read them.
Yeah, thank you.
We have them. So Menaxi says this book, we're talking about the TBR book by Sharon Bowman. This book was life-changing for me. And then talking a bit more in the comment section, I asked, so have you heard about the 4Cs map as described? Kansu also shared his insights, not just the trainings, but also the C4 improved the presentations a lot, which is awesome. That's what we like to hear. And then more in detail by Menaxi, I hope I'm saying the name right. I was coaching people who get points for completing some trainings. I told them that we are learning, and so to speak instead of listening, so they enjoyed the session, and in this way it was made more interactive. So thank you to both of you for sharing your stories, your TBR stories, and well, I would say thanks to both of you. Keep following us and JP and Marco's profiles, one for English-speaking folks and the other, well, Marco, we can say is the go-to person in the Italian community for all the things TBR, so make sure you're following him as well. And well, thanks all for being part of this. It's been a lot of learning, a bit of stretching as well in pure TBR fashion. So Anthony, I see that you're now, sorry, let's see, last minute, but that's the beauty of it. Anthony asks about difference between in-person and remote training. All of this is already answered some 15-20 minutes ago into the recording of this video, so I wouldn't ask JP to go through it again because we already have it, but I'll also share the links to the two trainings that are on offer. One is for in-person and one for online, and so you can get an idea of how it works. Well, folks, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. To the next one.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Cheers. Bye-bye.